Anyone can have an accident. And everyone hopes that when it happens to him, there'll be expert help readily to hand to do what has to be done. But we're not all as lucky as this man. He contrived to have his accident where there was an expert first aider handy. Not only that, there was a doctor aboard as well. With 2 qualified experts to handle the affair, we can expect a very high standard of first aid and casualty handling. We can rely on those highly trained people to bring great skill and expertise to the job. But what chance would you have if it was you called upon to look after an injured person? And the answer is a very good chance, if you learn the few simple rules we shall be looking at. But first, an important point. Even the first aid experts are not always right in what they do. First aid is a job where it may not be possible to be right every time. But at least, you needn't always be wrong. So let's call on the services of our friend Joe. You may not have met Joe before, but this is Joe. Now, Joe's a born loser. Things are always happening to Joe. For example, just now, Joe has suffered a minor accident. What we must avoid is so mishandling him that we turn his simple injury into a serious one, or a serious one into a fatal one. So let's start again. In most accidents, Joe, or his girlfriend Josie, will remain conscious and still breathing, although they may be injured. Now suppose this is the moment when you come on the scene. What do? Well, rule 1 is look. Carry out a quick examination. It may take no more than a second or 2, but you should always start by taking stock of the situation by observation, by looking. Take this man, who stepped off the pavement and was knocked down by a cyclist. Your first look shows you that there's blood coming from his ear, a nasty thing to see, and possibly due to a fractured skull. But also, he is pale, and his skin may be moist. Most probably it's shock causing that. We'll be saying more later about what other things you might see during that first brief look at the casualty, but for the moment, remember, rule 1 is look. And the question is, what do you do next? Well, the next important thing is actually something you don't do. You don't move the injured person unless you have to. In this case, there'll be no need to move him, although it'll be a good idea to see that the traffic does go round him. So that's rule 1, look. Rule 2, don't move. And they only take a second or 2. So now comes rule 3, which is treat gently. And gently is the key word. Give me something to use as a pillow, will you? In a case like this, you would first carefully sort out his limbs to make him comfortable on his back. You might think this is breaking rule 2, don't move, and in a way it is. That's why you have to be so careful. They give him a pillow, very gently put in place, notice. And they cover the ear that's bleeding. And they've done all that needs to be done until qualified help arrives. Now, this was a very simple example of the look, don't move, treat gently routine. And it let us see the 3 rules being applied. Now, it's all very well to say look, but what are we looking for? Well, 3 things you look for, quick as a flash, because you might be dealing with a life or death situation, and there may be no time to lose.
Oh, look!
Here's a situation that's not all that rare. A man just simply collapses in the street.
Oh, is there anything I can do?
The first thing you look for is to see if he's still breathing. Well, this man is, so it's best to lay him flat. And then you should loosen any tight clothing like his tie or belt. But you mustn't always let your casualty lie flat. Here's such a case. Your preliminary look shows you a tire mark across his chest. He's been run over, literally, and without a doubt his chest will be damaged. In a case of chest injury, he'll be more comfortable sitting up with an arm across his chest. The other time when you mustn't lay the patient flat on his back is when he's unconscious. We've already seen the expert dealing with this, and we'll come back to it in a moment. So then the first thing you quickly look for is to see if the casualty is breathing. Then, just as quickly, you look to see if he's bleeding. Well, it doesn't take much looking at this young man. He's certainly bleeding. But bleeding's easily dealt with. Make a pad of something and press it firmly but gently to the wound. If it's an arm or a leg that's hurt, lift the limb up so that the blood runs back into the trunk. And for sure, the bleeding will stop. So that was bleeding. The third of the three things we look for in a hurry is the casualty conscious? Well, have a look at this.
Oh, bloody hell. Look out! Below!
You don't have to be an expert to see that this chap's unconscious, all right. But he is breathing. Now, an unconscious casualty is not, repeat, not left on his back. He is gently put on his side. This is so that if he should be sick, or if there's blood in his mouth, it will run out of his mouth and not into his throat and choke him. This one simple action could save many lives every year. So if when you look at Josie she's not conscious, put her gently on her side. Remember then the three things you look for first as a matter of urgency. Is the casualty breathing? Is he bleeding? Is he conscious? These things dealt with, the heat's off for a bit, and you can take things a bit more slowly. So next, you look to see if he's in pain. Even in very small incidents, pain may be helpful in finding the injury. And it should, of course, be relieved, if possible.
Mum, tea's ready. I'm just coming, dear. Mum! Are you all right, Mum?
Here's an all too common occurrence. An old person falling on the stairs is quite likely to break a hip. And when you look, you'll see the outturned foot. That's a sure sign. And you'll not have to look very far to see where the pain is. The only thing to do is to try very gently to make her comfortable. That is, to relieve the pain. And then to keep her still. That done, you can send for help. And it is an emergency, so don't be afraid to dial 999. But remember, you should always try to relieve pain, because unrelieved pain will make the state of shock worse. Another common enough casualty, where pain is very obvious, is the case of burns. Here, your quick look reveals painful burns on his face, and his hands too are badly burnt. But you can see that he is conscious and breathing. Burns usually are very painful, and you can often relieve the pain with cold water. Cloths are soaked in the cold water and then gently applied to the burns. If ice is available, ice packs are even better at relieving the pain of burns. So Joe's pain is a good guide to where he's injured, and relieving the pain will lessen the shock. And now, a very serious injury to look for. The casualty might be paralyzed in one or more limbs. Have a look at this girl now. She's had a fall from her horse and may perhaps have broken her back. If so, she'll be unable to move some or all of her limbs. She may complain of feeling numb, as if she's been cut in two with nothing left below her waist. And she'll probably complain of pain in her back.
I'm not sure.
In a case like this, the untrained person can do very little, except make the limbs more comfortable perhaps, and maybe put a pad at her neck, if it can be done without much movement of the head.
Right, here we are. Do the trick.
Keep her still and reassure her that help is coming. Any attempt to move her stands a good chance of making sure that the paralysis is permanent.
It's okay, love. Peter's gone for now.
In cases where there's paralysis, then, of one or more limbs, Rule 2, don't move, applies more strongly than ever. Finally, in your brief examination, you look for broken bones.
Hey! Off the ball! Get it off!
There isn't much doubt in this case. You can see that the falling crate has broken this man's leg.
Go and get some splints.
Now, with a broken limb, you start by very gently pulling on the limb, avoiding twisting it unnecessarily, or bending it, or compressing it. Then, if you can, you splint the broken limb. What you're trying to do with your splint is immobilize the broken bone. That is, to hold it still so that it can't move about and get worse. The splint you use should be long enough to immobilize the joints above and below the break. And you pad it, if you can, simply to make it less hard and uncomfortable. If you can't find anything to use as a splint, bind the broken leg to the good leg instead. The important thing is to immobilize the limb. And don't forget, as always, your casualty may be shocked and in need of reassurance that he'll be all right. Well, we've now seen what we mean by Rule 1, look. First, the three emergencies. Is the casualty breathing, or bleeding, or conscious? Then the three where the urgency is less. Is there pain? Is there paralysis? Are there any broken bones? And now we should look more closely at Rule 2. Don't move unless you have to. And if you do have to, you must try to move the casualty like the experts. That is, in a way which is least likely to damage him further. As anyone knows, the framework of the body is the bony skeleton, and the main bones of the trunk are the spine, the pelvis, and the ribs. The various vital organs of the body are tightly packed within the bony framework, and normally they are protected by it. However, if any of the main bones are broken, there's a risk of sharp, jagged pieces of bone damaging some of the organs, such as the lungs, the intestines, or the bladder. Or what is usually much worse, there's a risk to the spinal cord if the spine itself is damaged, with permanent paralysis as the likely result. Obviously, the risks of such internal damage from broken bones are much greater if the casualty has to be moved. So, if you have to move the injured Joe or Josie, You should particularly avoid any twisting of the injured part. You should also avoid bending it. And you should avoid doing anything which would compress the injury. We've already heard that a very gentle pull on it is much better. In the hands of the experts, moving the casualty can look quite easy.
Hold him steady.
The trick of doing it safely is to have plenty of people and to do it slowly and gently and, as they say, all of a piece. That is, avoid twisting, bending or compressing any part of him in case of hidden injuries. And now perhaps we should look at one or two cases where Rule 2, don't move, doesn't apply, where even you must move the casualty at once. Obviously, if the casualty is in a building that's on fire, say, you'll get him out of it first. By moving him, you might do him further injury, but you'll kill him if you leave him there.
Dad? Dad, where are you? Dad?
The casualty may be in a poisonous gas. In that case, if you find him, you must get him out of it quick, or you may both die. Or again, if he's in or near water which is rising, you couldn't just leave him there. Sometimes the problem is very difficult, even for skilled first aiders. But just because it's difficult, you can't ignore it. He has to be got up, and all you can do is to follow the rules the best you can, trying not to twist, bend or compress him as you do it. Remember, when it comes to first aid, you can't always be 100% right and perfect, but you can always do your best to follow the rules we've seen. So there may be some situations where you have to move the casualty, but usually Rule 2, don't move, applies. When we look at Rule 3, treat gently, we realize that time after time the word gently has cropped up in what we've seen. This man's limbs were gently sorted out. The pad was gently pressed to this arm. Cold water was gently applied to the burns. And it was a gentle pull on the broken leg. And so on, and so on. Gently, every time. And now, let's sum up. The first rule was look. Take a few seconds to sum up the situation. And you look in order to answer 6 basic questions. Is the casualty breathing? Is he bleeding? Is he conscious? Is he in pain? Is he or she paralyzed? And finally, has he any broken bones? And whatever the answers, Rule 2 is don't move unless you have to. Rule 2, don't move. Rule 2, don't move. Rule 2, don't move. And Rule 3 is treat gently. Whatever treatment you decide on, do it gently. Whatever has to be done, be gentle about it, and never forget to reassure your patient that help is coming. Follow these 3 rules to the best of your ability, and although you might not always be right, you won't often be wrong. So you'll be able to hand over to the professionals a patient who will be more reassured. He'll be more comfortable, and what's more important, he'll be safer and more likely to make a good recovery. In a word, he'll be glad it was you who looked after him, and who knew, like the professionals, how to handle him with care.